In this video, we will discuss what a remote lesson can look like. So there's some important components to a remote lesson. This is the same as in your face-to-face classroom. You're just doing it remotely. So you want to start with an opening. You want to have some sort of instruction, some practice in there, a quick assessment, and some sort of closure. In the face-to-face classroom, you would give your students these 5 components of the lesson. So we want to make sure we still do that when we are teaching remotely. So when you are having a Google Hangout or creating a video lesson, you want to make sure that you encompass these 5 key pieces. So let's explore some of the ways that we can make that happen. For the opening, you can have a warm-up ready. For example, if I were to write this problem on a whiteboard, here's what it could look like. Hi guys, thanks for coming. It's 11:55 right now. Our lesson starts at 12 o'clock. But while we're waiting for the rest of the kids to show up, why don't you work on this problem of the day for September 5th today. Solve each equation. For first one, 4x minus 3 equals negative 6. And question 2, 6x minus 2 divided by 4 equals negative 8. Write these questions down on a piece of paper and work them out, and we will go over them as soon as class gets started. So when your lesson might start at 12 o'clock, or your Google Hangout might be scheduled for that time, but you might have students that show up early or students that show up a little late, but we don't want them to just sit there and do nothing. So it's good to have a warm-up already ready for them that they can work on, and you can go over with them, or you can have them write their answers in the chat. It's also important to repeat that message a few times so that when new people come in, they know. Once you get used to remote learning and the kids get used to it, you won't have to repeat this over and over. It kind of becomes an expectation, just like in the classroom. If you notice, I also put the date there. It's important to put the date so that we know what day this lesson was created and the warm-up or problem of the day is for what day. Another option for an opening is to try something fun that gets them thinking, such as which one doesn't belong. There's lots of these and they are free at wodb.ca. You can just search WODB and they show up, and there's tons of topics on there: math, science, English, social studies, and just fun random ones. And they're really a good way to get them thinking. So let's see how that could work. Hey everyone, thanks for coming. While we are waiting, we are going to work through this. On this diagram, you have 4 images. I want you to decide which one you think doesn't belong. You can write that down on a piece of paper or keep that thought in your head, and we're going to discuss that once the class starts. There is no right or wrong answer here. All of them have some way in which they don't belong, so it's good to see what your students are thinking, and it's just a good way to get the class started. Another option might be to celebrate some of your students. So for example, you could have this posted and sharing it on your screen. It says, "Way to go, Summer, you are rocking online assignments." We can still celebrate our students even though we might not be seeing them face to face all the time. So if we have some of these celebrations out there, it might encourage more students to come. You can mix the warm-up with the celebration, or the which one doesn't belong with the celebration. You can do however you want to open the class and add the celebration in there. All of that is completely up to you. It's just important that we start them with something so that they know once they enter that room that there's something that they can do. Now let's talk about instruction. So just because we are learning remotely, we still want them to have some sort of lesson or know what they're going to do that day. So I think it would be great if you told them what to print off before they come into class, or let them know what they are expected to be doing in that online remote learning time in that Google Hangout, what you're going to be doing within that day. Just because they're not in the face-to-face classroom, we don't want to just enter the Google Hangout and say, "Do you guys have any questions?" Because we know that them coming up with questions in the classroom was difficult. So we need to guide them with those questions and get them started. So let's see what that could look like. This is a Module 1, Lesson 7 lesson from Engage New York. These lessons have PDF files, and you can pretty much make anything a PDF. So if you have a virtual whiteboard, or you use a virtual whiteboard like EduCreations, or there's tons of them out there, you can share your screen and write right on the lessons. So let's see what that could look like. So if you let the students know to print out that Module 1, Lesson 7 note guide from Engage New York, or if you posted this in your Google Classroom or Canvas Classroom and asked them to print it out or write it out in their notebook, they could have this ready. And then when you get to classroom, you can just start writing on it right away. So this is downloaded as a PDF, and it's posted on a virtual whiteboard. This one is free from Microsoft. EduCreations is another one that's out there. And like I said, there's tons of them. So it says, Grandma's special chocolate chip cookies, which yields 4 dozen cookies. See, I can write right on this, just like I would in the classroom, calls for 3 cups of flowers. And then use this information to complete the chart. You can write right in here for them, and they can write with you. And it's a great tool to make sure that you're providing an instruction and they're doing what they're used to doing in the classroom and listening to you while you do it. And it's a great way to provide instruction. The important piece with instruction is to make sure that we are doing what we would do in the classroom remotely. So if you would be using your textbook in the classroom, have them use the textbook when you do remotely. If you would have them annotate an article in science class, have them annotate that article with you virtually. Don't make the instruction last so long so that they get bored, but we know that's the same way in the classroom. But do something that they are required to do, and that they know that it is expected of them in the lesson. Because our kids will so often say, I prefer to learn when there's a teacher in front of me. So make it so that there's a teacher in front of them. In my opinion, this is the best part. Then let's talk about practice. We have to give them some time to practice. So give them a question or two. You can type these questions in the chat. You can display these questions by sharing your screen. You can put them in your virtual whiteboard. You can put them on a Google slide. There's so many options and so many ways that you can do this with them. So let's take a look at how this could work. So now that I have given you some instruction, let's see what you learned. What are the small particles called that make up matter? And what method is involved when charges in an uncharged metal object are rearranged without direct contact with the charged object? Take a few minutes to think about the answers to these questions, and I'll let you know when we should put the answers in the chat, or I'll take some volunteers. Then I would provide some wait time so that everybody has a chance to look those answers up in their notes that they just took. Wait time is still a part of the remote learning classroom. You want to provide a little bit of wait time there so that everybody has a chance to answer. Then I would ask for volunteers for people to speak, or they could put their answers in the chat. Just a quick way to practice to see what they've learned after your instruction. And remember, it doesn't need to be several questions, just a few questions, and make sure that they got what you were teaching them. And let's talk about the assessment piece. In the classroom, we have formative assessments, we have summative, we have all sorts of assessments. So in the virtual classroom, your assessments can be fun. You can try quizzes, you can try Quizlet, you can do a Google form quiz, Kahoot, or even try Go Formative. Or you can just give them a couple more questions that they have to work out on their own, and they have to send you those answers. If you have time, you can go over those questions with them, but if your time is limited, then use it as your opening for your next remote lesson. Don't forget that we want to go over those questions, that assessment piece with them, the next day or the next time you meet with them. The last part of the remote lesson, probably the most important, is the closure. So you want to have some sort of closure that sums up the lesson. And this is for those kids that are watching the recording or for those kids that are there with you at the time. So one option might be to ask 3 questions about the day's lesson. Use those teacher talk moves that we always talk about in the classroom. Ask John what he learned today, and then have Rachel repeat what John learned and add something more to it. Have a way for them to talk about what they learned that day and provide answers to questions you asked, or do like a round robin going around the room. You can provide a link to a quick quiz or just have them write their answers to your question in the chat just to make sure that they grasp what you learned that day. Maybe you'll have them solve an equation or give you an answer to a science question or an important part of your lesson that day. And then it's very important to remind them how they can find the lesson in your LMS, whether that's Google Classroom, Canvas, whatever it is, and then use this time to remind them what to do in your LMS. If you just did a lesson on proportions, you could tell them to go take the proportions quiz in Canvas or in Google Classroom. If you might want to put a schedule up there that tells them what they should work on until the next remote learning session. And make sure you tell them where they can find this. You might even want to email them the recording of your remote learning lesson for those that missed it. Use this opportunity to let them know where they can find it and what they should do next, so that they know that it doesn't stop once this virtual learning lesson ends. And then you might want to provide time for questions, but dismiss those that are all set. This is important because it gives some kids a chance that don't feel comfortable asking those questions in front of the group to ask those questions to you. You might want to stop recording so that the last kid that hangs around, he or she feels comfortable asking you some questions. Just some reminders that you want to record the lesson. Put the date on the lesson. And if the date isn't appropriate, put the topic that you're going to be teaching that day, or maybe the chapter in the book that you're working with. Then make sure you post it in your LMS for others to view. You can email it to students, you can post it in your announcements, but make sure you let students know how they can view this lesson that you provided them. So the important components of a remote learning lesson are to have some sort of opening, an instruction, time for kids to practice, an assessment piece, and a closure. But most importantly, have fun. Treat this like it's your face-to-face classroom so that kids want to come and they will come.